Kundaka Nikaya, the Minor Discourses, the Theragāthā, verses of the Arahant Bhikkhus. Ekakanipāta, Book of the Single Verses. Introduction. Nidānavagga, Chapter 1, Nidānavagga. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Listen now and pay close heed as you hear roar after roar from those kings among lions who, while dwelling in their secluded mountain caves and huts, fulfilled the goal by completing the training before you, and now voice their thunderous verses from across the centuries past of the deathless they did attain. Whatever their name may have been, whatever their clan or past, see how they embodied the Dhamma itself, meditating tirelessly, dedicating themselves fully to the task. Thus, truly came to be known as the wise ones, indeed, for having lived the life they did. In each and every verse, see how, despite the passing of time, it clearly shines through the rawness of the unshakable they touched, through the words they left for us all to find, which they spoke while examining their own hearts that now completed the holy task supreme. Verse 1. Subhuti Tera. This little hut where I dwell is well protected from the wind and thundering rain, sheltering me with its unyielding roof from all that's going on outside. So, go ahead, O God of rain, keep pouring down as much as you like, for safe and sound is my heart, serenely resting in the refuge that is freedom unmatched, while I practice here in safety, enthusiastically and undeterred. So, go ahead, O God of rain, knock yourself out, and keep pouring down your rain as much as you like. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Subhuti. Verse 1.2. Mahakotita Tera. At peace, serenely still, done with conceit, and speaking only when necessary, unmoved, resting without agitation, having already shaken off the remnants of evil from the heart, much like the wind, having removed the dead leaves from a tree. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Mahakotita. Verse 1.3. Kankarevata Tera. Like a blazing torch, burning and turning the night into day, witness the wisdom of the Tathagatas, brilliantly shine and dispel the darkness of ignorance of all who come, willing to find out for themselves. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Revata, the one who was full of doubts once. Verse 1.4 Punna Mantani Putta Tera, the first of his verses. If you want to spend time with anyone, then at least make sure they are wise, possessing the purity of virtue, diligence, and the power to discern, dedicated to attaining the goal of the holy life and nothing less. For only such beings are the ones who can truly penetrate, the ones who can see by collecting themselves in the stillness of Samadhi, the Dhamma that is so subtle, fine, and hard to see. This was the first verse spoken by the Venerable Punna Mantaniputta. Verse 1.5 Dabba Tera. Once difficult to tame, but now trained and self-disciplined. Here I stand victorious, having vanquished all doubts, serene and contented, fully released, free from fear. Dabba is now quenched, unshakable at last. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Dabba. Verse 1.6 Sitavaniya Tera. Wanting to get away, the Bhikkhu went to Sitavana to be alone, dwelling in soothing contentment. Gone are now those exhilarating goosebumps. Triumphant, I sit in my firm resolve, with the full protection of mindfulness anchored upon the body. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sitavaniya. Verse 1.7 Bhalliya Tera. Having thrown asunder the king of death, along with his armies, all left in shambles, much like a mighty raging flood, having obliterated a precariously dangling bridge made out of reeds, he finally stands triumphant, with all fears of the heart now utterly vanquished at last, the one self-tamed and unwavering in his resolve. He indeed has finally attained full awakening. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Bhalliya. Verse 1.8 Vira Tera. Although once stubbornly hard to tame or discipline, but having fully trained himself and become thus self-tamed, now Vira, the hero, stands free from all doubts, contented, with the heart serenely settled, no more harassed by fears nor agitating worries. By never giving up, Vira, the victorious one, is now quenched, having gained the highest. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vira. Verse 1.9 Pilindavaccha Tera. One moment it was here, but in the next it was gone. It didn't matter, though, for the direction I received came at the perfect time. helping me make the most of this life. For I truly gained the very best of all directions, the best teaching indeed. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Pilindavacha. Verse 1.10 Punnamasa Thera. By attaining to that rare state of peace deep within the heart, the one restrained, possessing the highest knowledge, no longer finds himself concerned about this world or the one beyond, neither touched by nor sticking to anything any more. He restfully observes with his wise attention, seeing the coming and going of all things in the world. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Punnamasa. Chapter 2 Nidānavagga. Verse number 1.11 Chulavachatera. The Bhikkhu, whose heart is overflowing with joy, witnessing the Dhamma taught by the Buddha, comes to personally taste what freedom truly is, as he stands on the firm reality of safety unparalleled, realizing for himself the blissful comfort of peace, which is what's left once sankharas are no more. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Chulavaccha. Verse 1.12 Mahāvaccha Thera. Supported by the power of wisdom, with impeccable sila and virtuous conduct, collected in mind, delighting in the peaceful contentment of meditation, ever mindful throughout, eating only as needed to sustain the body, and with a passionless heart, one simply waits for his time to be up. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Mahāvaccha. Verse 1.13 Vanavachatera, his first verse. The lovely bright blue sky, glancing through the white puffy clouds, being reflected off the surface of the glistening pool of crystal clear waters, gushing forth from the crags of the surrounding boulders, all covered in refreshingly green moss, while the red ladybugs eagerly play and move about it. Ah, all this is truly delightful to me. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vanavaccha. Verse 1.14 Sīvaka Samanera. My preceptor said to me, Sīvaka, let us get away from here. Yes, although my body is here in the village, but the mind hasn't really left the forest's solitude. Before leaving, as I lie down to rest, I find myself already there. After all, there can be no shackles or bonds to tie down those who have come to know and see. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vanavaccha's student, the Samanera Sīvaka. Verse 1.15 Kundadhana Thera. 5 must be cut off, and 5 more to be left behind, while another 5 must be cultivated. But it is only when the bhikkhu has gone beyond the 5 that shackle and bind that he is declared as being truly the one who has crossed the flood. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kundadhana. Verse 1.16. Belathasisa Thera. Like a noble thoroughbred stallion, with its free-flowing mane and tail swishing in the wind, regally moving about with such ease and comfort, so are my nights and days spent, with such ease and comfort as I live in the happiness that has come from attaining the victory, untainted in its purity. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Belathasisa. Verse 1.17. Dasakatera. The lazy, living with gluttony, a big fan of sleep, who spends most of his time rolling in bed, while much like a fat pig, stuffing himself to his ears with food, the stupid one keeps going from one womb to the next, aimlessly loitering in samsara. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Dasaka. Verse 1.18. Singalapita Thera. An heir of the Buddha, that bhikkhu, living and practicing in the Bhesakala forest, having developed his perception of the body as made up of skeletons, now suffuses this whole wide earth as such, while seeing it as nothing more than a pile-up of bones and carcasses. Surely, by keeping up his resolute practice, very soon indeed he will certainly come to destroy all desire for sensuality, driving them all out of his heart. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Singalapita. Verse 1.19. Kula Thera. It is really so, for irrigators truly do channel the water. Fletchers do straighten and shape the arrow shafts. Carpenters also do bend and morph the wood into their desired form. As for those who take their vows seriously, they do tame and transform themselves indeed, too. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kula. Verse 1.20. Ajita Thera. There's no fear of death left in me. There's no yearning for life any more, either. In this way, remaining fully aware and with pervasive mindfulness, I shall leave this body behind and be done with it once and for all. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ajita. Nidānavagga, Chapter 3. Verse 1.21. Nigrodha Thera. I'm not afraid anymore of fearful things, because our teacher himself is the master of the deathless. In this way, steadfast bhikkhus progress steadily along the path, having shrugged off all remnants of fear from their hearts. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Nigrodha. Verse 1.22. Chittakatera, deep blue, with their lovely necks, the crested peacocks, being surprised by the fresh, cool breeze blowing through the Karamvi forest, go on releasing their cries, and in the process stir up the Bhikkhu, waking him up from his slumber to continue on meditating. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Chittaka. Verse 1.23. Gosala Thera. I enjoyed a meal of milk rice with honey at Velugamba, but without ever losing sight of the rise and fall of the aggregates, just as instructed by our dear teacher. Now I shall be heading back to the forest, towards my hilltop plateau, devoting myself to seclusion and practicing alone. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Gosala. Verse 1.24. Sugandha Thera. Look how wondrously amazing this Dhamma really is. It's been just a single vassa since I went forth, and I have already attained the three knowledges. For I have now indeed completed the task given to us all by our kind teacher, the Buddha. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sugandha. Verse 1.25. Nandiya Thera. Kanha, O Dark One, you're only dragging yourself to such terrible misery if you keep attacking this Bhikkhu, whose heart is now luminous in its splendor. For he has already arrived at the goal of the holy life, who, through his hard work and striving, has now attained to the highest fruit. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Nandiya. Verse 1.26. Abhaya Thera. Having listened to the lovely and well-spoken words uttered from the very lips of the Buddha himself, the kinsman of the sun, I carefully penetrated the subtle meaning they carried. Just like a master archer shoots his arrow and splits a single hair strand in two. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Abhaya. Verse 1.27. Loma Sakangya Thera. I will pierce through sharp twigs and razor-like kusa grass, along with anything that stands in my way, whether it be creeping vines or thorn bush that easily cut and break into the soft skin. I will push my way through with my bare chest, tossing them all aside, as I do what's necessary for me while living alone, devoting myself to renouncing and develop in utter seclusion. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Loma Sakangya. Verse 1.28. Jambugami kaputta Thera. Are you now over with that infatuation with your wardrobe and things to wear? Aren't you still in love with your shiny jewelry? Yet, I wonder where this lovely fragrance of virtue is coming from. Whether it's coming from you or from some other bhikkhu. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Jambugami. Verse number 1.29. Haritatera. Sharpen and keep yourself firm and tight, just like the bow has no choice but to straighten at the hands of the determined bowmaker and the heat he applies to it again and again. So, you too, Harita, by maintaining your heart's steadiness, tear asunder ignorance completely and destroy it into smithereens. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Harita. Verse 1.30. Uttiyatera, his first verse. When in the past I would become ill or unwell, mindfulness would naturally arise in me. But now that this body is stricken by this illness, I no longer have the luxury of delaying or being heedless any more. So, time for me to get to work with vigilance. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Uttiya. Chapter 4. Chatuthavagga. Verse 1.31. Gahvaratiriya Tera. Although constantly being harassed and tormented by the assault of biting flies and mosquitoes, ceaselessly making contact with the body, living in the wild and massively deep forests, one should quietly endure them all with clear mindfulness, vigilant like the warrior elephant that marches on into battle undeterred. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Gahavaratiriya. Verse 1.32. Suppiyatera. I gladly exchange this aging body in order to obtain that which is beyond aging. Burn as I do for Nibbana, the supreme peace I seek, swapping all of this, putting up with all that I must face, so to attain that unsurpassed sanctuary and be done with this yoke once and for all. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Suppiya. Verse 1.33. Sopaka Thera, his first verse. Just as a loving mother would be so tender and caring towards her only son, so too one must be tender and caring towards all those beings one comes across. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sopaka. Verse 1.34. Posiya Thera. The best thing for a wise person to do is to never approach and simply stay away from all women, That, indeed, is the one great thing about women, to never be in their presence. Having left the village and gone to the forests, I went visiting a house for my meal. But the visit didn't last long, for I quickly got up and left abruptly, without a single morsel of food entering the bowl, nor a single word leaving the lips of Poesía. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Poesía. Verse 1.35 Samanyakani Thera. It is by practicing this path that all those who genuinely seek happiness do find it. In addition to gaining much honor and respect from those who really matter, his renown continues to grow as he keeps developing in the Noble Eightfold Path, being upright, steadfast, intently driven, and unwavering, all of which will unmistakably take him straight to the realization of the deathless itself. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Samanyakani. Verse 1.36 Kumaputta Thera. To learn and study the Dhamma is lovely. To live the noble celibate life is lovely. And to finally no longer be living the household life is indeed lovely. Now, inquiring and finding out the meaning of what matters most, while doing what matters the most, and showing respect to those deserving of it, this itself is the daily life of the true recluse, who has walked away from everything and nothing to call his own. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kumaputta. Verse 1.37 Kumaputta Sahayaka Thera. The Venerable Kumaputta's companion. Traveling here and there as you roam about, with senses unrestrained and awareness fully absent, how could there be any samadhi to be attained then, when such aimless wandering brings you nothing but regret? So, stop being a nuisance, harassing others who are doing their work, and just drop your foolishness and get on with your task. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kumaputta's companion. Verse 1.38 Gavampati Thera. The one whose psychic abilities froze in place the advancing floodwaters of the river Sarabhu. Gavampati is unshakable in his freedom. To him the mighty devas pay obeisance and honor, for he set himself loose from all the shackles and bonds that keep beings tied up, and thus he has gone to the farther shore. This was the verse spoken to and by the Venerable Gavampati. Verse 1.39 Tissatera. His first verse. Once having gone forth and left all sensuality behind, the bhikkhu should practice ceaselessly while living his life as if he is repeatedly being struck by sharp swords coming at him from all sides, or just like a blazing fire that's placed on his head, that keeps burning him, scorching and tearing off his flesh. In this manner, he must train himself while firmly anchored in sati. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Tissa. Verse 1.40. Vadhamana Thera. Once having gone forth and left all manner of re-becoming and rebirth behind, the bhikkhu should practice ceaselessly while living his life as if he is repeatedly being struck by sharp swords coming at him from all sides, or just like a blazing fire that's placed on his head that keeps burning him, scorching and tearing off his flesh. In this manner, he must train himself while firmly anchored in sati. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vadhamana. Chapter 5. Nidānavagga. Verse 1.41. Sirivadha Thera. The flashing of the thunderous lightning reaches even the hidden valley within the gorge, stretching between Vibhara and Pandava. But there, in the depth of it, sitting in a cave, the unmatched Buddha's son meditates, ardently, unstirred by all that's going on outside. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sirivadha. Verse 1.42. Khadiravaniya Thera. Come, Chala, Upachala, and you too, Sisu Upachala. Be careful and stay sharply alert, for the one who approaches us is none other than the master archer, known for splitting hairs. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Khadiravaniya. Verse 1.43. Sumangala Thera. Well done indeed. I'm now finally released from it all, those pesky, inferior, twisted things. Done with working with those sickles and plows of mine. Done with that back-breaking work too, tilling the soil with those spades. And even if they were right here, I know their time with me is finished. For I am now over and done with all of them. That's it. So now, use your time wisely, O Sumangala, and meditate. No more wasting time, playing with such useless toys, and simply practice. Practice and practice some more, diligently, as if there's no tomorrow, O Sumangala. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sumangala. Verse 1.44. Sanu Thera. Mother, it is when someone is dead and gone that they weep for him, or when someone, although being alive, has gone missing. But what is the reason for your tears? For I am both here in front of you, alive, and in the flesh. Yet you still shed tears for me. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sanu. Verse 1.45. Ramaniya Viharing Thera. Although a thoroughbred ox, burdened under a heavy load, may trip and fall, it's sure to quickly stand back up firmly on its feet yet again. The same is true for the disciple who has attained to genuine insight, possessing right view, the noble thoroughbred, the true son of the self-awakened Buddha. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ramaniya Viharing. Verse 1.46. Samidhi Thera. It is through my strong faith and confidence that I left lay life behind and went forth. Since then, my mindfulness and wisdom have been steadily growing, and now the heart is finally grounded in ultimate serenity. So go ahead with your lame tricks if you like, conjuring up illusions and making up imaginary sounds as much as you want, for you can neither touch me nor bother me ever again. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Samidhi. Verse 1.47. Ujjayathera. I pay homage to you, O genuine vanquisher, you who are liberated in every respect. Training myself while anchored in the very dispensation you revealed. Now I finally live without any asavas left in the heart. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ujjaya. Verse 1.48. Sanjaya Thera. From the moment I went forth, relinquishing the household life, I do not recall a single instance when I engaged in any intentional action of doing harm to another, or any unbecoming or ignoble wish connected to animosity or hatred. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sanjaya. Verse 1.49. Ramanneyaka Thera. Despite the forest commotion, with the noise and clatter of animal sounds, and birds of all sorts singing their songs, this heart of mine does not waver nor become perturbed, for I live utterly devoted to seclusion. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ramanneyaka. Verse 1.50. Vimala Thera, his first verse. The falling rain refreshes the scorched earth, while the cool wind blows as lightning flashes across the night sky. Yet, with all these happening at once, my thoughts are completely stilled, as my heart remains fully balanced in its serene clarity. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vimala. Chapter 6. Nidānavagga. Verse 1.51. Godhika Thera. The rain deva showers the earth with his sweet melody. Meanwhile, my little kuti that's so comfy is well thatched and leaks no more, as my heart dwells in perfect balance with serene clarity. So, let the rain deva keep pouring down his showers as much as he likes. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Godhika. Verse 1.52. Subahu Thera. The rain deva showers the earth with his sweet melody. Meanwhile, my little kuti that's so comfy is well thatched and leaks no more, as my heart is firmly anchored upon the body as its object of meditation. So, let the rain deva keep pouring down his showers as much as he likes. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Subahu. Verse 1.53. Valliya Thera, his first verse. The rain deva showers the earth with his sweet melody. Meanwhile, my little kuti, that's so comfy, is well thatched and leaks no more, as I live with vigilance, moment to moment, striving non-stop. So, let the rain deva keep pouring down his showers as much as he likes. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Valliya. Verse 1.54. Uttiyatera, his second verse. The rain deva showers the earth with his sweet melody. Meanwhile, my little kuti, that's so comfy, is well thatched and leaks no more, as I live here without another to keep me company. So, let the rain deva keep pouring down his showers as much as he likes. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Uttiya. Verse 1.55. Anjanavaniya Thera. Plunging deep into the Anjana forest, I built for myself a small shelter to live in, and there I attained to the three knowledges. The Buddha's instruction is now complete. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Anjanavaniya. Verse 1.56. Kutiviharing Thera, his first verse. Who's in my little hut? A bhikkhu is in this little hut, living here without passion, with serene contentment. So do know this, friend. Your little hut was not built nor occupied in vain. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kutiviharing. Verse 1.57. Kutiviharing Thera, his second verse. This has been your little hut. Now, don't tell me you want to get another one. Shrug off all wishes for yet another hut. For wanting to replace it with a new one, Bhikkhu, will only bring you more suffering. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kutiviharing. Verse 1.58. Ramaniya Kutika Thera. My little hut is quite pleasing, a delight to be in, offered as a gift by all those with tremendous faith in the Dhamma. Thus, why would I have any interest or any need for women here? So, you women, go and look for those who still have a need for you or find you charming. Go and try your tricks on them, as they won't work on me. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ramaniya Kutika. Verse 1.59. Kosalavihari Thera. With my strong faith I went forth, leaving behind the lay life altogether. Meanwhile, others built me this kuti, a shelter for me here in the forest. Now I strive on with diligence, with full attentiveness and mindful awareness throughout. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kosalavihari. Verse 1.60 Sivali Thera. All my deep desires I held in my heart, which led me to come and enter this small hut, calling it my home, are now reaching their fulfillment, as I keep giving up constant comparing and conceit. I'm soon to realize the true knowledge of release. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sivali. Chapter 7 Nidānavagga. Verse 1.61 Vappa Thera. The one who sees is able to see another who also sees, as well as seeing all those who are unable to truly see. But the one who cannot see has no chance of seeing those who also cannot see, let alone seeing those who have the eyes to see indeed. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vappa. Verse 1.62 Vajjiputta Thera, his first verse. Living in the wilderness by choice, left alone and tossed into the woods, much like a discarded tree log that's unfit to serve the carpenter and his craft. But don't forget all those full of envy of the life you have chosen for yourself, who, much like beings in hell, are jealous of those about to be reborn into the heavens. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vajjiputta. Verse 1.63 Pakha Thera. They sweep down and pick them up, only to lose what they thought was now theirs, as they get smashed around and then collapse, falling down from their height. But soon after, they do it all over again, led by their greed, as they keep returning back, only to be smashed up and dropped back down again. What had to be done here is now been done. However, living with enjoyment and delight. Happiness that's finally been attained, sought after, and finally won by coming back to the heart's experiencing of true ease. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Pakha. Verse 1.64 Vimala Kondanya Thera. The one bearing the name of a mango tree was the one who gave birth to me, as I was born through the one whose kingly banner shone bright. Yet it was the conqueror himself who crushed the evil I brought with me, destroying their malevolent future possibilities, all with the power of his Dhamma. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vimalakondanya. Verse 1.65 Ukhe Pakatavacha Thera. That which has been amassed and accumulated over for so long, all that has been thrown aside by Vacha, as he sits here honored and respected with eminence, teaching the noble Dhamma to householders who've come to eagerly listen and learn the Dhamma. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ekakanipāta. Verse 1.66. Meghiya. The great vanquisher, who, having transcended all Dhammas and gone beyond all of them, is the one who himself taught and guided me, as I carefully listened to the instructions he gave to me. While living close to him, ever mindful and attentive to my teacher, I realized the three knowledges. Hence, I declare the dispensation of the Buddha is now complete. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Meghiya. Verse 1.67. Ekakanipāta. The defilements have been ripped apart and scorched into oblivion. Through my practice of meditation, I pulled out the very roots of future rebecoming, destroying any chances for the endless cycles of births and deaths in samsara. So now I'm finally done with any and all renewed existences. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ekakanipāta. Verse 1.68. Ekakanipāta. Through diligence and persevering effort, the true sage, who through his non-stop training has now attained to the higher mind, having trained himself and thus truly become a sage, no disturbance exists that could rattle or perturb his heart, for indeed he dwells peacefully in lucid and ever mindful contentedness. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ekakanipāta. Verse 1.69. Channa. On hearing the Master's sweet words, teaching the beautiful Dhamma with his supreme knowledge and understanding, I was inspired to enter the path of freedom, that is, the deathless, which I too was finally able to achieve, a genuine gift left for me by the kindest of all beings, my beloved teacher, the incomparable expert, who knew exactly just how and what would disentangle and truly release me from my ignorance, and thus taste the release of ultimate safety. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Channa. Verse 1.70. Punna, his second verse. Having a heart that is suffused with virtue is wonderful, but it is having wisdom in the heart that makes one supreme indeed. For when the heart is possessed together with both wisdom and virtue, then it truly reigns supreme, making one victorious throughout the cosmos, whom both humans and devas alike bow in deep respect. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Punna. Chapter 8. Nidānavagga. Verse 1.71. Vachapala Thera. although quite subtle and truly very fine to be discerned. It truly isn't that difficult to attain extinction, which is Nibbana itself. If one associates with those who are purified in their virtue, while exercising wise scrutiny, living with kindness, humility, and empathic consideration, yet remaining sharp throughout and driven enough to understand the genuine meaning of truly living this holy life. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vatshapala. Verse 1.72. Atuma Thera. Just as the newly grown bamboo is so hard to push back down, once its rigid and sharp tip has pierced its way out of the ground, so it is with me, as you still try to push me into matters that never interested me, nor had anything to do with me, while you keep wanting to give me a wife. I've already gone forth, woman, can't you see? So if you want to give me anything, then just go ahead and give me the approval of a loving parent. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Atuma. Verse 1.73. Manava Thera. On seeing an aging person for the first time, and later, one suffering from sickness and disease, followed by a dead body, having expired whatever lifespan it may have once had, were enough for me to just renounce whatever pleasures this life had in store for me. And just like that, I simply went forth, giving it all up, before the magic show even had a chance. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Manava. Verse 1.74. Suyamana Thera. Whether sensual desire, malevolence, drowsiness, or procrastination, the same with restlessness, regrets, and worrisome thoughts too, as well as any bewildering skeptical doubts, all these have no place at all within the heart of the Bhikkhu. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Suyamana. Verse 1.75. Susarada Thera. It's so valuable to associate with the wise, the pure ones who are intent on their spiritual development, while practicing wholeheartedly. For even a late-blooming, slow learner like me, in such a fertile and nurturing company, now has become truly wise, with all doubts and perplexities removed. So, stay with and learn from the wise, who could turn you into an arahant, even if you were once a dullard, much like me. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Susarada. Verse 1.76. Pyanjaha Thera. When others are in a frenzy, unsettled, and desire to fly away, you stay put, firmly anchoring yourself down. When others get bogged down with the mundane, chaining themselves down to it, make sure to get up, keeping your heart uplifted and untouched by all such nonsense. When others get bored, seeking a way out, not finding it to be exciting enough, That's a good place for you to remain and settle down. And wherever or whatever it is that others delight and find pleasure in, that's no place for you to be. So get up and leave all such nonsense behind. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Bhikkhu. Verse 1.77. Hataro ha putta tera. Previously, this heart of mine could not stay still, and would often flutter here and there, wandering to wherever its whims would carry. But now it's under thorough check, properly guided by me, however I please, just like a mahout, having tamed the wild elephant, now commands it with the trainer's sharp hook. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Hataro Haputta. Verse 1.78. Mendasira Thera. Through countless rebirths in the endless cycles of samsara, I kept on roaming, but without ever finding me a single genuine respite or compensation. But although the suffering I had to bear was indescribably great, now I see all of it has disappeared and just fallen away. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Mendasira. Verse 1.79. Rakhita Thera. The entirety of passions are now all melted away. The fires of anger and hatred I once had in my heart are extinguished too. And with the complete dropping away of all my past blinding delusions, I am now finally at peace, dwelling in the quenching coolness that is Nibbana Supreme. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Rakhita. Verse 1.80. Ugga Thera. Whatever actions I have done, however many they may have been, be they insignificantly small or incredibly serious, given the intentions placed behind them, now all of that is simply shattered and fully exhausted, for there is no more coming back left for me to any future existence whatsoever. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Ugga. Chapter 9. Nidānavagga. Verse 1.81. Samitigutta Thera. Whatever actions I have done in the past, and however many, whether their consequences are insignificantly small or incredibly serious, what's now left for them is only this life of mine alone, where they could still get a chance to manifest or be experienced. Otherwise, they will all be left here to be fully exhausted, for there's no more coming back for me to any state of existence ever again. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Samitigutta. Verse 1.82. Kassapa Thera. My child, go in safety in the direction of that place where you'll find plenty of nourishment and true security, while at the same time keeping yourself sheltered and free from all manner of dangers. Thus may you find true peace, while happiness surrounds you everywhere you go. May you never be touched nor overcome by either sorrow or grief ever again. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kassapa. Verse 1.83. Siha Thera. Siha, do not give up. Stay vigilant by maintaining your constant mindfulness with full awareness. Be it night or day, tirelessly give it your all as you strengthen your heart by growing within you those brilliant qualities, whereby you too will come to discard at last this accumulation of ceaseless wants and passions called a body. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Siha. Verse 1.84. Nidānavagga. Spending the whole night dedicating himself to sleep, while seeking delight as he socializes with companions throughout the day. When will this fool ever take the task at hand seriously and just put an end to his suffering? This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Nidānavagga. Verse 1.85. Sunāgatera. Versatile in wisely discerning the numerous signs manifesting within the heart, while fully appreciating the beautifully sweet taste of seclusion. Constantly engaged in meditation, and ever present with his practice of mindfulness. Such a person for sure comes to experience for himself the genuine happiness that lies far beyond anything of the physical. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sunāga. Verse 1.86. Nāgita. Outside of our monastic order of bhikkhus, many doctrines are taught, but none of those paths ever takes one to true release, which this path most certainly does. For where could you ever find a teacher like ours? The Blessed One himself teaches us his Sangha personally, the very Dhamma that he realized himself through his own efforts without any teacher, while holding nothing back and no secrets, instructing us with open hands. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Nāgita. Verse 1.87. Pavittatera. The aggregates are now seen for what they truly are, while the very seeds for rebecoming are utterly destroyed, with no chances for them to ever sprout again. Smashed altogether is the cycle of endless rebirths for me, and now I'm finally set free from ever tasting future lives again. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Pavitha. Verse 1.88. Ajjunatera. Out of the terribly strong currents that easily drown, I mustered up the courage to pull myself up and come to rest onto dry land. Thus, while being tossed around in those sweeping floodwaters, I was able to penetrate and thus finally understood the noble truths. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Arjuna. Verse 1.89. Deva Sabhatera, his first verse. The marshy quicksands are now crossed, and the infernal crevasses and their precipices have all been dodged. In being finally released from all the floods and shackles that bind, I now can rest, knowing that conceit is entirely wiped out. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Deva Sabha. Verse 1.90 Samitatta Thera. Fully penetrated are the five aggregates, seen for what they truly are. Although they still have to function, they are none the less cut off at the root. With this whole business of wandering through rebirths in samsara finally over, with no more renewed existence now left for me. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Samidatta. Chapter 10 Nidānavagga. Verse 1.91 Paripunnaka Thera. Sumptuous dishes made for the very few, although exquisitely prepared with the flavors of over 100 ingredients, still fall miserably short in being delicious, due to their incredibly poor taste when compared to the Dhamma taught to me by my teacher Gautama, the Buddha of unbound vision. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Paripunnaka. Verse 1.92 Vijayatera. With his asavas utterly destroyed, the one whose happiness no longer comes from the food he eats, but finds his true comfort in experiencing release, through seeing the signless that is also empty. His footprints are now as impossible to trace as are those of birds flying through the vast sky. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vijaya. Verse 1.93 Ekakanipāta. Sense pleasures are so tedious, where you've always ended up in anguish, Erika. When did they ever leave you satisfied or truly happy, Erika? For all those indulging in sense pleasures, sooner or later, face the inevitable pain they bring with them. Oh, Erika. But it is the one not pursuing the empty gratification promised by sense pleasures, who surely doesn't come to grief nor faces sorrow. Erika. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Erika. Verse 1.94 Mettaji Thera. Homage be to the Blessed One, to the glorious Lord, the kinsman of the Sun, the very best born through the Sakyans, who on having attained to the most excellent, the supremely beautiful Dhamma, now shares it so generously with us all. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Mettaji. Verse 1.95 Cakkupala Thera. Although utterly blind, with not a single hope left for these two eyes of mine, I will, however, continue on my path through this desolate jungle, even if it means I have to crawl my way through in this pitch blackness. But I will never take a step forward with a dirty and wicked companion, who wants to hold my staff, trying to serve as my eyes. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Chakkupala. Verse 1.96. Kanda Sumana Thera. Making an offering by giving away a single flower landed me in the heavenly realms of delight, where I spent over 80 million years. And now, by making the best use of whatever leftover blessings that still remained for me to reap from that beautiful offering, I attained to the extinguishment of final release. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kanda Sumana. Verse 1.97. Tissa Thera, his second verse. I gave away the hand-carved bowl made out of expensive bronze, just like the one made of pure gold before it, which I'd already left behind. But now I carry this beautiful bowl given to me, made out of humble clay, where every time I touch it, leaves me feeling as though I were being anointed a king yet again. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Tissa. Verse 1.98. Abhaya Thera. When mindfulness isn't there, as you catch sight of whatever provokes lust, then the mind, having neither restraint nor full awareness, locks onto that scene, longing for the promise of more pleasure to be experienced, trapped in recalling its features again and again, agitating the heart throughout. Meanwhile, the asavas keep getting nourished, ensuring for you the certain repeatability of yet another birth. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Abhaya. Verse 1.99. Uttiya Thera, his third verse. When mindfulness isn't there, as you hear the sound of whatever that provokes lust, then the mind, having neither restraint nor full awareness, locks onto that sound that you heard, longing for the promise of more pleasure to be experienced, trapped in recalling its features again and again, impassioning the heart throughout. Meanwhile, the asavas keep getting nourished, ensuring for you the certain repeatability of yet another birth. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Uttiya. Verse 1.100. Deva Sabha Thera, his second verse. Fully supported by genuinely correct exertion, when you don't abandon or go beyond the boundary of your own home, that is, the four establishments of mindfulness, then your efforts will be adorned by the flower garlands of release, where you'll finally enjoy the purity of the citta, freed from all the asavas. The perfect safety of being quenched will be yours at last. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Deva Sabha. Chapter 11. Ekakanipāta. Verse 1.101. Belattanika Thera. What's the point in a so-called giving up the household life when he has no purpose or goal in truly living it through genuine spiritual practice. For in reality, however, he lives for the sake of filling up his belly, gluttonous and lazy. He keeps stuffing himself much like a big fat hog, plowing the soil with its snout, looking for some kind of food or grain in the muddy trash pile. For this reason, once he's dead, that idiot will always end up in some mother's womb, being reborn again and again. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Belatanika. Verse 1.102. Setu Chatera. Fooled by the sly trickeries of their own conceit, agitated by ceaseless preparations secretly taking place behind the scenes, while constantly being tossed around between winning and losing, they miss out on experiencing the heart becoming stable and collected. Thus, they never come to rest in samadhi. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Setucha. Verse 1.103. Bandhura Tera. This doesn't please me, nor does it give me contentment or joy. I am, however, quite at peace and gladdened every time I get to taste the sweet flavor of the Dhamma. So, having already drunk from the supremely incomparable nectar, why in the world would I have anything to do with poison? This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Bandhura. Verse 1.104. Kitaka Tera. I feel so light, so utterly filled with happiness in the body. Spiritual joy vibrates within me, elevating my heart to such heights, where I feel as though I'm about to float, much like soft cotton is lifted off the ground as it takes flight, even if it's ever so gently touched by the silent breeze. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kitaka. Verse 1.105. Malitavambhatera. If barely surviving in a place, then just leave. But if, where you live, things are too good for you to never want to leave, then pick up your bowl and outer robe and just leave there as well. For the one who has come to see with wisdom cannot stay with nor enjoy the requisites with all those who are on a different quest than the path that takes one straight to the goal. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Malitavambha. Verse 1.106. Suhe Manta Tera. When an explanation has 100 aspects to its true meaning, yet one is able to perceive only a single aspect, due to being too lazy to consider the possibility for more, then such a person is indeed a procrastinating fool, satisfied in getting only one meaning, when he could have easily gained so much more from aspiring to pierce through, which is what the sages actually do, hence making them 100 times wiser than the fool. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Suhemanta. Verse 1.107. Dhammasava Thera. I only went forth after carefully weighing in all the factors, as I walked away from home life into homelessness. The three supramundane knowledges are now obtained, and all that I was taught by the Buddha is now finally fulfilled. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Dhammasava. Verse 1.108. Dhammasavapitu Thera. I went forth at the advanced age of 120, as I walked away from home life into homelessness. Now, the three supramundane knowledges are obtained, and the instructions given by the Buddha are now finally fulfilled. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Dhammasavapitu. Verse 1.109. Sangha Thera. Even though he's secluded himself from the world, still he doesn't care to apply himself, nor heeds the instructions given by the teacher, with limitless compassion, wanting to see us achieve our highest potential too. Instead, this fellow lives uncontrolled, while his senses know no restraint, just like a young deer keeps surveying the forest floor, always looking for things to explore. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Sangha. Verse 1.110. Usabha, his first verse. The trees have grown tall, rising to such heights to even block the mountains from view, all because they received the life-giving rain from the clouds above, that resemble massive ships sailing across the sky. All this keeps inspiring Usabha, who's come seeking seclusion in the wilderness, where his lovely qualities are flourishing too, just like the trees' vibrantly growing foliage that keep increasing and rising tall. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Usabha. Chapter 12. Nidānavagga. Verse 1.111. Jenta Thera. To go forth is not easy, with so many things to consider. But to stay at home is indeed an impossibility, therefore not an option for me. For the Dhamma is and remains truly profound, whereas to eke out a living takes so much effort, let alone to obtain wealth. In either case, there's much difficulty to face for certain, but for us, going by with very little, life is much more bearable, you see, when considering the inescapable fact of impermanence. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Jenta. Verse 1.112. Vachagotta Thera. The three supramundane knowledges are now mine. Being a master at meditation, I dwell in the deep serenity of the heart, and by having achieved my ultimate goal in life, I can finally say that the Buddha's instructions to me are now fulfilled. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vachagotta. Verse 1.113. Vanavachatera, his second verse. The free-flowing crystal waters, gushing out of giant boulders. Meanwhile, black-faced monkeys and bashful deer roam all around, who come to enjoy the vibrantly green moss, richly oozing with dew from the spraying mist. Living in these highlands amidst the rocky crevasses truly fills my heart with delight. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vanavaccha. Verse 1.114. Adhimutta Thera, his first verse. How in the world will this life bring you any true happiness, when all you think about is food, getting more and more fat by the day, always lusting for some kind of pleasure to gain from this miserable life of yours, which, by the way, keeps running out by the minute? This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Adhimutta. Verse 1.115. Mahanama Thera. Well, here you are, about to face your miserable finale, standing at the edge of this famous Nidānavagga hill, overlooking the steep valleys underneath, abundantly sheltered with thick shrubs and strewn with its lovely solitaries. Here is where your despicable and wretched existence comes to its favorable and highly welcomed conclusion. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Mahanama. Verse 1.116. Parapariya Thera, his first verse. Having given up the 6 spheres of contact, they all now remain shut, with my senses that served as the means of access to them fully guarded. I have pulled and vomited out the terrible root cause of future misery, and thereby reached the final termination of the asavas. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Parapariya. Verse 1.117. Yasatera. While still having my hair anointed with scented oils, and braided with precious gems, adorned and fully decked in gold and fine jewelry, I came to acquire the 3 supramundane knowledges. Thus was fulfilled my beloved teacher, the Buddha's instructions to me. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Yasa. Verse 1.118. Kimbilatera, his first verse. Like a fiercely dreaded and unavoidably sticky curse, old age arrives as an unwelcomed guest. While still young and beautiful, she keeps telling herself that it only happens to others, believing herself to be the exception. But now, when I think of my own youth that's past, strangely enough, it feels as if it's someone else's life that I recall, even though it was in fact my very own. But despite the changes that happened to this form, it still feels as though I'm the same all along. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Kimbila. Verse 1.119. Vajjiputta Thera, his second verse. Now that you've left all other things behind and gone into the seclusion of the forest, where finally you're sitting at the foot of a tree, while deep into your heart you've placed Nibbana Supreme as the only goal. Meditate, therefore, O Gautama. Meditate and stop being negligent already. Anyhow, what does all this hurly-burly world have anything to do with you? This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Vajjiputta. Verse 1.120. Isidatta Thera. The five aggregates are now fully penetrated and seen for what they truly are. Yet, although they have to remain for now, they nevertheless stand with their roots fully cut off. I have now eliminated suffering at its core, and thus reached the destruction of the asavas, the very contaminants of the heart. This was the verse spoken by the Venerable Isidatta. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.